So I want you to picture this. You are sitting at your desk on a random Tuesday afternoon.
Oh, yeah. We have definitely all been there.
Right. You've got this lukewarm cup of coffee in one hand, and with the other, you are just repeatedly clicking this button on your screen that says next.
Just totally powering through.
Exactly. You are taking one of those mandatory corporate or educational training modules. It could be on, workplace safety or data privacy or diversity and inclusion.
And your brain is just totally shut off.
Completely.
Yeah.
As you click, your eyes just glaze over. You're basically experiencing the digital equivalent of highway hypnosis.
That is a great way to put it. Yeah.
Because you arrive at the final screen, like the one that says, congratulations, you passed.
Yeah.
But you have absolutely zero memory of the journey to get there.
Right, because the information just bounces right off of you. It's a highly passive experience.
Totally passive.
And the goal there isn't actually to learn, it's just to clear a bureaucratic hurdle. You are optimizing for speed rather than comprehension.
Which means the concepts, no matter how important they actually are, they never really penetrate your long-term memory.
Right.
Let alone alter your behavior.
Exactly.
Which is incredibly frustrating when you genuinely want to understand something complex.
Oh, absolutely.
So today for our deep dive, we are looking at a 2026 academic paper that tries to solve this exact problem. And they are tackling some of the most difficult, sensitive topics we navigate as a society.
It's a really ambitious study.
It really is. The paper is titled, Let's Talk About Race: The Use of Virtual Reality in Improving Higher Education Students' Understanding of Privilege.
It was put together by researchers from George Brown College, the University of Toronto, and a tech company called TapVigo Solutions.
Right. Now, I do want to pause here for a second because these terms, anti-racism, privilege, bias, they immediately raise the temperature in any room.
Oh, for sure. They are highly charged topics.
Very charged. And so our goal today isn't to take a political stance or to endorse the module itself. We're acting purely as impartial investigators here.
We're just looking at the data.
Exactly. We want to know if strapping on a VR headset actually changes how the human brain processes these heavy, emotionally charged concepts compared to just reading them on a screen. Because if you are the learner out there, if you've ever sat through a mind-numbing training session, you want to know if VR is actually the ultimate shortcut to retaining this kind of complex information.
That's the real question.
So, okay, let's unpack this. How did they actually set this up?
Well, it's a fascinating question of methodology, really. We are looking at the mechanism of learning here. The researchers started with a very clear premise, which is that traditional methods like lectures, two-dimensional videos, textbook readings, they often fail when it comes to interpersonal dynamics.
Because they're just too passive.
Exactly. They do not require emotional engagement. Your mind just wanders. So to test an alternative, they used a virtual anti-racism module.
They call it the VM, right?
Yes, the VAM. Specifically, one titled Let's Talk Race, which they developed alongside a UK-based tech company called Body Swaps.
Body swaps. Okay, so instead of just clicking next to a slideshow, the students in this study were placed inside a fully immersive 360-degree virtual environment.
Right, they had the headsets on and everything.
And what's cool is they didn't just dump them in some generic, low-polygon digital void.
No.
The creators actually designed the space to mimic the real-world locations at the Toronto Higher Education Institution where the students were physically studying.
Which is such a deliberate psychological choice.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Well, grounding the simulation in a familiar environment reduces the cognitive load. You aren't trying to figure out how to navigate a strange sci-fi world.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. It immediately signals to your brain that the interactions you are about to have are relevant to your actual daily life.
Okay, so the source material provides a screenshot that really paints a picture of this.
Yeah, the locker room scene.
Exactly. You are in a locker room setting, so a very typical everyday college environment. Sitting on a bench is a digital avatar, and hovering in your field of vision is a prompt, and it's analyzing a specific conversational statement.
And it's a tricky one.
It is. The scenario deals with a character who says, "I'm not racist," and then mentions having a mixed-race Mexican boyfriend as a way of essentially claiming, some of my best friends belong to marginalized groups, therefore I can't have bias.
Right. And what's fascinating here is how the researchers draw a sharp line between using VR for technical skills versus interpersonal competencies.
Because VR has been used for technical stuff for a while, right?
Oh, decades. We have decades of data showing VR is exceptional for technical training. I mean, a medical student can practice a surgical incision in VR 1,000 times.
Wow, yeah.
It's safe, it's repeatable, and it provides instant haptic feedback on the angle of the scalpel.
But human conversations don't work like scalpels.
Exactly. Interpersonal competencies. So, communication, emotional intelligence, navigating a microaggression, those have traditionally been considered just too nuanced, too messy to teach through a simulation.
Right, because humans are incredibly unpredictable. I mean, you can program a virtual organ to bleed if a virtual scalpel cuts it wrong. But how do you program a virtual human to react realistically to an insensitive comment?
It's tough.
Yeah, it seems like it would easily veer into feeling totally artificial or like a cartoon.
And to bridge that gap, the module doesn't just throw you into some free-for-all sandbox.
Okay.
You are placed in this physically safe but cognitively challenging environment alongside two digital coaches.
Abiku and Nola.
Right, Abiku and Nola, they act as your guides. They provide context for the scenarios, but more importantly, they prompt you to participate.
Wait, like actually participate?
Yes, you have to actually speak out loud.
Hmm?
The system evaluates those verbal interactions to meet you where your current knowledge level is.
Okay, so it's actively forcing you to vocalize your thought process. Which brings us to the actual subject matter they were tackling.
Yeah.
The module focuses heavily on privilege.
Right.
And that is a word that, depending on who you were talking to, can instantly trigger a massive defensive wall.
Oh, almost instantly.
Like if someone feels like they're being told their life hasn't been hard, the learning just stops right there.
And the researchers were acutely aware of that defensive reflex. To bypass it, the module explicitly moves away from the rigid, traditional categorization that suggests privilege only belongs to a single dominant group.
Right, because in older critical scholarship, that group was often narrowly defined as white, male, able-bodied, and heterosexual.
Exactly. And the problem with teaching that rigid definition is that anyone who doesn't fit neatly into that exact box might assume the concept doesn't apply to them at all.
Like, oh, I'm not that, so I'm off the hook.
Right. Or, conversely, those who do fit the box feel uniquely targeted and they just shut down.
So instead, they treat privilege as something highly contextual. Like it's a spectrum. It's basically the idea of intersectionality brought to life in VR.
Yes.
You can be deeply disadvantaged in one specific area of your life, but hold significant, completely invisible advantages in another.
And framing it that way drastically changed how the students internalize the information.
Numbers back that up, right?
They really do.
Mm.
The survey data post-simulation showed that 87% of participants felt more knowledgeable about the concept of privilege.
Wow, 87%.
Yeah. And 91% had a clearer grasp on how privilege can limit other people's access to basic services.
That's huge.
But beyond the raw numbers, the interviews revealed these profound shifts in perspective.
Yeah, the anecdotes in the study really highlight this. Like, one student had this massive aha moment during the simulation. They went into it thinking of privilege strictly in terms of, like, race or extreme wealth. But through the VR interactions, they realized that simply having parents who went to college is a massive invisible advantage.
A textbook privilege, as they called it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It dictates how you navigate institutional systems.
And another student realized that being neurotypical, just having a brain that processes information and sensory input in a way society considers standard, is a form of privilege they had literally never even considered.
It forces the user to recognize the water they are swimming in.
No.
Oh, and another participant noted that just living in a certain country, even if you face discrimination within that country's borders, provides a baseline degree of global privilege compared to living elsewhere.
It really expands the definition.
But wait, I'm struggling with something here.
What's that?
If this is essentially a highly advanced video game, aren't people just gaming the system?
I see what you mean.
Because when I play a game with dialogue options, I figure out what the game wants me to say to get the good outcome, and I just click that option.
Right.
I don't necessarily internalize the moral of the story. So, does putting this heavy social dynamic into a simulation actually create genuine self-awareness? Or are they just, spotting the privilege to win the points?
That is the exact skepticism many educators have regarding gamified learning.
Right.
And the researchers analyzed this under the lens of self-reflexivity.
Okay, self-reflexivity.
Yeah. If the module were just a scavenger hunt where you point at other avatars and say, aha, there's the bias, it would be a failure.
Just clicking next in 3D.
Exactly. But the architecture of this specific VR experience forces users to look inward. A significant demographic detail from the study illustrates this perfectly.
The international students.
Yes. 30% of the participants were international students, and in the follow-up interviews, many of them explicitly stated they had never been taught these concepts in their home countries.
Which makes sense because the cultural context of privilege changes completely depending on your geographic location and, the dominant culture you grew up in.
And the VR environment successfully translated these highly abstract academic concepts into their immediate daily reality in Toronto.
Oh, right.
For example, one participant reflected on how their experiences as a newcomer in public spaces, like riding the subway or just trying to navigate a supermarket, were entirely dictated by how they looked and sounded to others.
So the simulation didn't just ask them to solve a puzzle about some hypothetical character.
No, it provided a framework that immediately mapped onto their real-world stress and social positioning.
That makes a lot of sense. But the source material details a very specific technological mechanism that makes this level of reflection possible.
Avatar embodiment.
Yes, avatar embodiment. And reading about it, it sounds like a literal psychological Freaky Friday situation.
It is wild, and here's where it gets really interesting, because avatar embodiment is arguably the most powerful variable in this entire study.
It uses a mechanic they call body swapping, right?
Yes, body swapping.
So picture this scenario from the module. You put the headset on, and you are asked to choose an avatar for yourself. You can pick one that looks like you, or one that looks completely different.
Right.
You go through the initial scenarios, and eventually you witness a racialized character experiencing a clear moment of discrimination.
It's the simulation pauses.
It pauses. And you are instructed to give that character advice on how to handle the situation. And like you said earlier, you literally speak your advice out loud into the headset's microphone.
And then the perspective instantly flips. The
Oh.
system utilizes that body swapping mechanic. Suddenly, you are looking out of the eyes of the character who just experienced the discrimination.
Okay.
And sitting across the table from you is the avatar you chose for yourself at the very beginning of the simulation.
And that avatar is speaking to you in your exact voice, delivering the advice you literally just gave.
Yes.
Like you have to sit there inhabiting the digital body of the marginalized person and receive your own advice. That is such a brilliant, confronting mechanic.
It is incredibly confronting.
Because it's one thing to casually tell a friend, hey, just don't let that comment bother you.
Right.
But it is an entirely different psychological experience to be forced to sit across a table, look at a digital version of yourself, and hear your own voice telling you to just not let it bother you when you are supposed to be feeling the weight of that discrimination.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the neurological sleight of hand happening there is profound.
Yeah.
The researchers refer to the broader scientific literature on VR, which shows it can increase what is known as cognitive proximity.
Okay, cognitive proximity.
Right. Think about a standard physical classroom setting. If a professor or a peer challenges a student on their privilege or points out a flaw in their reasoning, the student's natural psychological defenses immediately flare up.
Of course.
We are biologically wired to protect our egos and social standing in a group setting.
Yeah, we fold our arms, we get defensive, we totally stop listening because we feel attacked in front of our tribe.
But when you are alone inside a headset, experiencing this highly realistic interaction with yourself, the technology bypasses those defensive barriers.
Because no one is watching.
Exactly. The brain's spatial and sensory processing centers are so overwhelmed by the immersive environment that it creates a sense of illusory body ownership.
Wow, illusory body ownership.
Your brain temporarily accepts this virtual body as your own because there is no physical social judgment, no real people watching you fail or struggle. Your ego just doesn't need to mount a defense.
That is wild.
Several students even noted that seeing the varied, subtle emotional expressions on the avatars' faces made it vastly easier to engage authentically.
Because it felt real.
Exactly. One participant flat out called it a highly effective empathy-building tool because it bypasses the intellect and goes straight to the sensory experience of being in someone else's shoes.
The researchers make a very crucial distinction here, though. They warn against something called placeholder embodiment.
Ah, yes. Also referred to in sociological terms as identity tourism.
Identity tourism, which is this trap where developers think they can just, put a white student into a black avatar, have them walk around a virtual room for 5 minutes, and declare that empathy has been achieved.
Right, like a checkbox.
Exactly. It treats marginalized identities like a digital costume you can just zip on and off for a novel experience. It's shallow. And frankly, it can be pretty insulting.
Well, the study emphasizes that for VR to be a legitimate educational tool, It cannot rely on merely swapping digital skins.
It has to go deeper.
The simulation has to embed the actual structural barriers, the social dynamics, and the specific grounded concerns of that group into the narrative of the simulation itself.
Right.
You aren't just looking down and seeing different hands. You are being subjected to the specific conversational traps and systemic friction that a person in that position faces daily.
So the empathy doesn't come from the visual trick.
No, it comes from experiencing the social friction.
Okay, so the empathy is there. The defensive walls are down, and the students are internalizing these concepts on a much deeper level than they would by just, reading a textbook.
Absolutely.
But, and this is a but feeling bad for someone or recognizing an injustice doesn't automatically mean you know how to help them in the real world.
No, it doesn't.
So does this newly acquired virtual empathy actually translate into real-world behavior change?
Well, that is the leap from knowing to doing. And this is exactly where the researchers uncovered a significant limitation.
Right.
Initially, the survey data looks incredibly promising. After the module, 74% of the participants said they felt equipped to stand up to someone who is using their privilege to limit access to services.
I mean, that sounds like a massive success story.
It does, on paper. But when the researchers dug deeper during the qualitative interviews, a glaring advocacy gap emerged.
An advocacy gap.
Yeah. The participants had gained the empathy, they had the awareness, but they felt completely devoid of prescriptive strategies.
They didn't know what to actually do.
Right. They didn't know the actual mechanics of how to address privilege in the real world without causing the exact kind of defensive blowback we were just discussing.
It's the paralysis of not knowing what to say.
Exactly.
One of the participants specifically said they wanted, quote, tips and tricks to address these issues without the fear of hurting someone's feelings.
Yes.
And another student made a really astute observation about human nature. They noted that if people feel pushed into a corner, there is no listening coming from them anymore.
This raises an important question, which is the difference between diagnosis and treatment.
Okay.
The VR module acted as a masterclass in diagnosis. It trained their brains to spot bias, to identify the nuances of privilege, and to truly feel the emotional weight of those dynamics.
But the treatment.
Exactly, the treatment.
Yeah.
The actual interpersonal communication required to gently but firmly correct a peer or de-escalate a high-stakes social environment, that requires a completely different skill set.
It totally makes me think of a flight simulator.
Oh, how so?
Like, the VR module successfully taught them how to read all the instruments on the dashboard. Right?
I see where you're going.
They know when the plane is losing altitude. They can feel the turbulence. But the simulation never actually taught them the sequence of buttons to push to land the plane safely.
Yes.
So they are just sitting in the cockpit, hyper aware that things are going wrong, but terrified to touch the controls in case they make it worse.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it. And the researchers actually theorized that some of this hesitation might be tied to what they called a quintessentially Canadian sensibility, given the study took place in Toronto.
Right, the polite Canadian stereotype.
Yeah, there is a deep-seated cultural desire to be polite, to avoid rocking the boat, and to not cause a scene in public.
But honestly, while the Canadian context is an interesting cultural variable, it feels like it points to a much more universal human fear.
I completely agree.
Because whether you are in Toronto or Tokyo or Texas, entering into a socially risky conversation triggers a neurological freeze response. Nobody wants to be the person who ruins the dinner party, right?
Yeah.
Or creates a hostile work environment by saying the wrong thing, even if their intentions are good.
Because conversations about racism and systemic privilege can very easily create closure rather than openness if they're not handled with extreme emotional sensitivity.
Right.
If you simply attack someone with your newfound awareness, they will shut down, and the opportunity for growth is totally lost.
So the empathy isn't enough on its own.
No. The study ultimately concludes that while virtual reality is unparalleled for bypassing ego and building foundational empathy, it is not a standalone cure.
Okay.
Institutions still need to provide prescriptive, scenario-based practice, likely with real human facilitators, to guide students through the actual verbal mechanics of these uncomfortable conversations.
So the VR is the primer. It basically prepares the soil, but the human-to-human practice is still required to actually grow the communication skills.
Precisely. You cannot eliminate the human element from interpersonal training.
So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive looking for a cure for the mindless click-next fatigue that plagues modern education and corporate training.
Right.
And based on the findings in this 2026 paper, It is clear that virtual reality, when it is carefully curated, thoughtfully designed, and structurally embedded, is far more than a flashy gimmick.
Oh, absolutely.
It has the proven capacity to foster a genuinely layered understanding of incredibly complex social issues. By shifting the learning experience from passive text to active, embodied empathy, it forces us to confront our own reflections, literally, through that body-swapping mechanic.
The data proves that we can use technology to artificially simulate the lived experiences of others in a way that successfully triggers genuine human empathy and cognitive proximity.
Right.
But as we look at the limitations of the study, I think it leaves us with a rather profound philosophical question to consider. If we increasingly rely on perfectly calibrated virtual simulators to teach us how to relate to one another, do we risk atrophying our natural, unaided human imagination?
Oh, wow.
Like, will a day come when we can only truly empathize with someone if we have the software required to digitally download their perspective?
Man, that is a heavy thought to carry. If the empathy machine breaks, do we still know how to care about each other without the digital training wheels?
Exactly.
Well, definitely something to mull over the next time you're sitting at your desk, tempted to just hit next and let your brain check out. Remember that engaging with the messy, complex reality of other people is active work.
It really is.
Take that perspective into your next meeting, your next study session, or the next time you find yourself in a difficult conversation. For all you learners out there, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep diving deep.